Welcome into Beyond the Red Carpet. Today I am happy to have returning Herbie J. Pilato, who has a new book out this month called Connery, Sean Connery, as a reference to Bond, James Bond, the great line that we've all known for all these years. So welcome back, Herbie. I am so happy to hear about all things Connery and Bond.
Thank you very much, Francine. Delighted to be here. Love Sean. He was just the best Bond for sure.
Bond, yes. I read the book and it's fascinating. I have so much to talk to you about. First off, let's start at the beginning. He went to St. Andrews University. That's where Prince William has gone. So this is a famous university. I'd never heard of it before, but it is it for wealthy, or is it just a regular beautiful? It's a beautiful campus, but is there a reason why he selected St. Andrews?
Well, Sean didn't come from a wealthy family, so there was probably other things involved there, but I don't think it was because of his wealth. He didn't have wealth. He was very self-educated when it came to the classics. He really taught himself about Shakespeare and Ibsen and all those people before he really while he was delving into his career, into acting, into exploring acting as a career.
Well, and prior to acting, this is what interested me in reading this. He placed third in the Mr. Universe competition. That
one
just
of
blew me
those.
away.
He should have got first, of course. I mean, come on, he's Sean Connery. Yeah. And that's where he really ultimately began his acting career as well, because a friend of his who was also a bodybuilder, suggested he should try acting, which ultimately he did do in a small part in South Pacific, the stage play.
Yeah, he was born Thomas Sean Connery. And explain to me, I know in South Pacific, he decided to drop the Tom or Tommy. How did that come about?
Yeah, that just kind of happened too. I mean, Sean just seemed obviously a little bit more fion, if that's a word, than Tom. Sean Connery, Tom Connery, Sean Connery. So it just kind of happened.
Well,
he had several different names. There was Little Tommy, Big Tam. I mean, he had all these nicknames throughout his life.
But once he went to Sean, he just stuck with it. He did not even answer to Tom or Tommy anymore. He was just Sean. Yes. Sean Connery. Okay, now you mentioned he was into Shakespeare and he did study the great literature. He played before Bond. He played a lot of literary big wigs. I mean, he played a lot. He played Alexander the Great. He played I can't remember which king it was, but he was really into the classics.
He was very much into the classics. As a kid, he loved comic books and stuff like that, like many children of all ages, of all cultures. And it kind of always envisioned himself in the movies, but it really, really wasn't a thing until he started modeling and he started doing the weightlifting, and people just said, you know what, instead of just standing still and looking great and making money from that, you can make a lot more money as an actor. So he gave 100% really to everything he did. And he was a very strong personality. So he very, very dedicated to acting once he decided to do it.
And he did have a lot of roles prior to Bond, but right now let's focus on Bond, because something I had not known before is Barry Nelson was the very first James Bond
on screen, correct? In a like a 1 hour offshoot film or TV pilot or whatever. It didn't go, but yes, he was the first to play James Bond on screen. Absolutely.
That's unreal. I'd never heard of that, and I'm going to have to go dig it up on YouTube somewhere. But now I'm going to read off a list from your book of those who were in the running to play James Bond. Cary Grant, oh my gosh. At 58, he thought he was a little too old for this. Is that right?
Yes.
I can't imagine Cary Grant as Bond, James Bond. James Mason.
Yes. Yes. He probably was a little too old as well, I think.
You think? Patrick McGowan, Rod Taylor. Now, I adored Rod Taylor, but he thought it was beneath him, quote unquote. That's kind of has a big head. I think he would have been cool as Bond.
Yeah, and what I love too, another big head, as you say, would be Jack Lord, who Sean would work with in Dr. No, or one of the earlier films. And he wanted co-billing with Sean. He played the American secret agent connection to James Bond in Dr. No. And he really wanted equal billing, so that took guts. He certainly became a star of his own with Hawaii Five-0. But yeah, so he was, when you said big head, automatically I thought of Jack Lord. So
okay, Jimmy Stewart. Are you serious? Jimmy Stewart was considered for Bond?
Everybody's considered for a big role. Whatever era of Hollywood, there all the people. There were so many people that turned out or auditioned for Charlie's Angels years later and ended up becoming, other stars like Lindsay Wagner and Linda Carter tried out for Charlie's Angels. So usually when a big role comes along, everybody and their mother, somehow is considered or auditioned for that role.
And you did mention Trevor Howard and Rex Harrison and David Niven. Now, I think David Niven would have been fabulous.
Well, David Niven ultimately did kind of play Bond in Casino Royale, which was that takeoff of Bond before Daniel Craig actually did Casino Royale the right way decades later. But yeah, David Niven and everybody and I did that takeoff on James Bond, which Sean was really not that pleased with.
I've interviewed several times Pierce Brosnan, and he was anxious to get over the Bond. I'm not sure if he felt trapped, but he was really happy to have his turn as Bond come to an end. And I get the feeling by reading your book that that's the same thing that happened with Connery.
Well, Pierce, first of all, really was approached to play Bond right before, I believe, Remington Steele or during when he was doing that, but NBC wouldn't let him out of the contract. So that's when they went to Timothy Dalton, who I think did a terrific job as Bond. Everybody, thought, oh, he wasn't up to snuff. I thought it was terrific. And then Pierce, he finally got cast, but he was older. So maybe he felt he was just a little bit too old for the part anyway. But as far as Sean is concerned, early on, obviously, he was shocked, really, that he got the part because he was bald. And he told everybody, he was like, I'm bald. And they're like, we don't care, wear your toupee and let's move on. And then he ended up becoming this superstar because of the first film. And then by the time the second, film came along, it was like, okay, what's going on in the world? And then there was, From Russia with Love, which was really his favorite Bond movie of his Bond movies. And that's when everything got out of hand and it became overwhelming for him. And I mean, it was just really crazy, wild, like Beatles mania type thing. But it was funny, and I tried to point this out in the book. I mean, the subtitle of the book is Before, During, and After, his most famous role. Whatever he tried to do, and he did amazing work, but he tried to do so many different roles that were beyond James Bond, but there was still a little piece of James Bond in everything he did because he was James Bond. I mean, that's all there's to it. He was born to play that role. So it was a very odd predicament for him. Be careful what you wish for. He wanted stardom, he got it, and then it became too much for him. And that is really the case with so many actors and stars who are associated with one particular role, whether it's, Sean Connery or Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched or Mary Tyler Moore from Mary Richards or what Dinah Rigg, which is my next book, which is coming out next year, from the Avengers. But, and I point this out really in the book too, is like Dinah Rigg, who really did break away from her Avengers role, but she didn't age as well because she didn't take care of herself. She was a heavy smoker, whereas Sean always looked great and took care of himself, but he really didn't break away from Bond as much as he thought he did. He did The Untouchables, and he won the Oscar. He did a lot of great movies, like Name of the Rose and Robin and Marion, and on and on and on. But there was still James Bond in there, in my opinion, I guess.
I think in most people that grew up with the 007, they consider Sean Connery James Bond. But here's a quote from one of his friends, that's Michael Caine. He said, if you knew Sean in those early days, one did not raise the subject of Bond. He was much better actor than just playing the role he was most associated with. He walked down the street and would hear, look, there's James Bond. And that rattled him. He just cringed at that because, well, that made him famous to begin with. But
right. Well, I think it was partially because of he didn't like doing the press. He didn't like publicity agents or, publicists or whatnot. But that was, again, at the core, when he became so popular, he got sick of it. But then he came back in Diamonds Are Forever. And then he came back with Never Say Never Again, in 1983, which was a different production than the Broccoli films of James Bond. And then later on, years later, he did The Rock with Nicolas Cage, which wasn't really James Bond, but it was a character that was a secret agent later on in life, and he could have easily been an older James Bond. And then shortly before he died, he did voiceover work as James Bond. So he eventually really came to peace with it. But he struggled throughout his career in being known as Bond, one way or the other.
And as you point out through the pages, there are many pages. It's a great read, to be honest with you. It was very interesting. You said that he wanted to make Bond age over time, not just be the same, not the same cookie cutter, and add his own aspects, his own reality to it. How did that come about? Was he able to really make James Bond himself his own, or did he have to really rely on what Ian Fleming wrote?
Well, Ian Fleming didn't want him at all. Ian Fleming, first of all, the character, the way he envisioned it, was this tall blonde guy. And then Sean comes along, and Broccoli really, and the producers are the one who convinced Ian Fleming that, look, we've got to go with this guy. He's just like super cool and he's the best. But he had tattoos, which he got in the Navy, and Ian Fleming didn't like that because James Bond is, at the time, it's too cool for sophisticated for tattoos. So it was really very, very, very strange. And he always thought that James Bond was just born at 33. It's like he didn't have a mother, didn't have a father, didn't have a family. Who was this guy? That bothered him, that there was this lack of character development. But then when On Her Majesty's Secret Service came along in 1969, and he said no to doing that movie, and George Lazenby, or Lazenby, however you say it, came along and replaced him. It was an incorrect move on Sean's part, because really that film gave James Bond more development, more character development. He fell in love for the first time. He got married to Dinah Rigg, by the way, for the first time. So that was really a mistake for Sean not to do Bond. So after George does that film, and he really wasn't all that great in it, although that movie now is considered really one of the best Bond movies in retrospect, Sean came back to the character with Diamonds Are Forever, which was released in 1971. But Diamonds Are Forever ended up being like really one of the lesser Bond films. So it was a strange dichotomy. He was a very complex human being. James Bond and Sean Connery.
Well, I think if my memory serves me right, that there's only one film in which Bond got married to. It says "You Never Live Twice," and
No,
was there a
it
second one?
was on Her Majesty's Secret Service. On Her
Mhm.
Majesty's. Maybe he got married some other time in the books, but
Okay,
he
well,
only
he
got
did
married once.
yeah, and "You Never Live Twice." Didn't he marry a Japanese woman? I believe.
In the book?
I thought the movie. We're gonna have to
Oh,
go back and rewatch
oh,
that.
wait a minute. You are correct. You
Yeah.
are correct, but it wasn't a real marriage. It was like a fabricated marriage for the storyline that for what they were trying to do. But in on Her Majesty's Secret Service, James Bond actually fell in love and actually got married.
Wow. Well, wonders never cease. I can't imagine Bond married. I mean, did he ever say anything? Do you know of anybody recalling any stories about him saying that Bond should be married with kids or something like that? That would have been a very interesting aspect of the whole
I think if
story.
he got married with kids, he would have had to retire. And really, he got married again, I believe, the only other time in Daniel Craig's last film, the last Daniel Craig James Bond movie, where I hope I'm not spoiling this for everybody, but when James Bond dies, which was just insane, So I mean, I don't even want to think about what they're going to do with the franchise. And everybody really beyond James or beyond Sean Connery did a very noble job. All of them did. Roger Moore had his own take on it, but none of them really could compare to Sean. None of them, in my opinion. Again,
Well, do you think that the franchise has run its course and might be better to end?
I think they should, because James Bond was of his time. He really wasn't all that respectful of women.
No.
And that part of his character changed, thank God, later on. But James Bond wasn't the only character like that in the 60s. That was the mentality, unfortunately, of the machismo, the macho guy.
Now, something that really got to me was that in 1961, Life magazine published a list of favorite books from Russia with Love, made President Kennedy's list of his favorite movies. And 6 months or right before he passed away, I mean, he screened the movie with James Bond from Russia with Love, November 20th, 1963, 2 days before he went to Texas. Well, that's his last movie he ever saw. That's an incredible little tidbit of
Yeah,
movie history.
it sure is. It sure is. And yeah, that's fascinating that happened. And certainly, too, it was on the day that the rehearsals began for Bewitched is when Kennedy passed away. So there was a lot going on in the world of pop culture at that historic time when Kennedy was assassinated. So much was happening in the world of pop culture as well as the political, a global world.
I think it'd behoove you to write a book just on that, on
Yeah,
every.
probably would.
I think that would be fabulous, fascinating. Because you have so many books out, and I know we spoke before about I guess it was which book did we do? Elizabeth Montgomery last time?
Elizabeth or Mary, one of them.
Yeah, Mary Tyler Moore. That's the one we talked about last time. So there's I have a list of so many interesting facts from your book. It's just amazing. One thing after another. Sean Connery was considered to play Captain Von Trapp in The Music Man. I mean, no, The Sound of Music. Excuse me.
Sound of Music. That would have been great. That would have been great. Well, he sang in Darby O'Gill and the Little People.
Right.
Very briefly, when that was his first big mainstream film, it was a musical. So he could have done it. He could have handled it. It would have been wonderful, I think. But I don't think The Sound of Music would have been the same without Christopher Plummer. And that wonderful song he sings, Edelweiss, it's my favorite song in the whole world from The Sound of Music. I don't know if Sean would have been able to pull that off.
No, I think it's pretty good with Christopher Plummer in that role. But just to imagine Sean Connery in that, and it blows my mind to imagine Cary Grant as James Bond. So I mean, all these little pieces all fit together perfectly in the history of the entertainment world. I just think they do. He was perfect for the time. Now, Robin and Marian was his favorite non-Bond film. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Why was that?
Well, I think probably because he just loved Audrey Hepburn. And it was just really such an elegant and eloquent little film, about a character study of these two people who were fabled, mythological figures, and they were really explored as realistic individuals, and he loved that. It was a combination of the fake classics and the fact that he got to play a character with much development, a fake character with a lot of development. And he loved Audrey.
Well, besides Audrey Hepburn, who I think everybody adores anyway, were there any other actresses that Sean Connery felt really excited to be with or to work with on screen?
He enjoyed the Untouchables, and the actors anyway there. He respected, it's really, really important to point this out, but he respected all the women that he worked with, and especially on the Bond films. He had an affair with a few of them, like Natalie Wood's sister there, Lana Wood, from Diamonds Are Forever. But the women also adored him. Barbara Carrera, who starred in Never Say Never Again, his last film as Bond, wrote the foreword to my book. Luciana Paluzzi, who starred in Thunderball, playing the same character, really, that Barbara had played in the remake, which is essentially Never Say Never Again is a remake of Thunderball. Luciana adored Sean. He always, he respected women. He didn't flirt and seduce every woman he worked with, which everybody assumes that was the case. He respected women, and yes, he had affairs, and yes, he had issues with respect for women. But again, a lot of guys did in the 60s. He wasn't the only one.
And it's also reflecting of the times. His time is totally different from now.
Exactly.
You have so many cute anecdotes in here. The hat tossing. When Bond comes into the room and tosses his hat and hits the hat rack perfectly, and you say he was taken out and they were practicing for a half hour and he never got it right, but he comes in, first shot, first take, and he does it. And that was his joke on the whole cast there, because he knew he could do it, and he was just playing with everybody.
That's amazing. And that happened too with Dick Van Dyke, because there's one scene in the Dick Van Dyke Show where he has to toss his hat in that very similar way, and he does it on the first take. So I don't know, the acting angels had to be with both Sean and Dick Van Dyke for those particular moments in their on-screen history.
So it does show that he had a pretty good sense of humor.
He had a wonderful sense of humor. He was a complex guy. He was raised in a not so great environment. He had issues with his father. His father had issues with him. His mother adored him. He was a fighter as a kid. That's how he survived. And he was not academically on the money, but he was self-educated, and he had troubles in his first marriage, and yet he had a wonderful, beautiful second marriage, if with a couple issues there. But she stayed with him. His first wife was an actress who I think competed with his stardom. She wasn't happy with his stardom. He wasn't happy with his stardom of James Bond, but she wasn't either, because she couldn't make her mark living in his shadow. So that was a main issue between them. Diana Salento.
It'd be hard to be in James Bond's shadow. That's first of all.
Yes.
But he was engaged prior to his first marriage to another actress who wouldn't marry him because he wasn't Jewish.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
well, she wanted to marry him. Her family didn't want her to marry him. That's correct. That's correct, which is very sad.
And before we leave, we just have a couple minutes left. There is, you go into his brother coming into the entertainment business. Can you just briefly talk about that and how he continued in his own brother's legacy?
Yeah, he loved his brother. But when his brother started, doing takeoffs and satires on James Bond as well, I mean, Sean wasn't happy with the whole Casino Royale thing. And then his brother went and did a spoof on James Bond. There was some tension there when that happened, especially because Sean did whatever he could for his brother and regarding his career. So, look at all of us have flaws. All of us have issues. All of us have complex relationships with the closest people in our lives. Getting back again to Mary Tyler Moore and who had a strong relationship with Valerie Harper, but they also had their issues. Elizabeth Montgomery had issues with her husband, Bill Asher, especially when you're in the public eye, like Sean Connery and every actor or performer is. Whatever issues you have are exacerbated because you're in the public eye and everybody sees your move. It's not easy being a star in the public eye. So there was all of that, but he did a lot of good. He donated a lot of money and time to various charities, one of which was his own, which was dedicated and focused to helping the youth of Scotland where he grew up. So overall, he was a pretty wonderful dude. Complex and had issues, and it wasn't great with some of the things that he did, but overall, he was a pretty awesome guy.
And as you point out in the book, he is buried in Scotland in his home motherland, and that completed the circle of his life.
Yes.
So I really I can't tell you, there are so many things in this book that I just found so fascinating, and little tidbits that some things just blew me away. So I really applaud you for this book.
Thank you so much. I try to make it different than all the other books out there about Sean or his movies or Bond. I wanted it to be a biography, the first biography in depth that explored every one of his roles beyond Bond as well as beyond Bond, and to give an in-depth perspective of his entire life and career. And having Richard DeMarco, who was his lifelong friend, write the introduction along with Barbara Carrera, who wrote the foreword, was a pretty cool thing. And that alone makes the book different than any other book out there. Yes.
Well, it is a well-rounded look at the life of Sean Connery, as it is titled. And I really applaud you. It's a very, very good read, and anybody interested in James Bond and or Sean Connery should pick up the new book by Herbie J. Pilato. So thank you, Herbie, for joining us. And next year we'll have you back for your newest book.
That would be lovely. Thank you, Francine. It's always a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. And for the viewers, I will see you next time when we take another look beyond the red carpet. Bye-bye.
With over 30 years of experience in real estate and the mortgage industry, Darlene Mays provides knowledge and expert guidance to clients looking to buy or sell a home. Serving clients throughout South Orange County, Darlene specializes in the senior community of Laguna Woods Village. Darlene works with her clients to ensure the highest level of service, from the beginning of the process right down to the closing table. If you are looking to buy or sell, who you work with really does matter. Call Darlene Mays today.